counter component that it's rendering the count from that is being provided by a reducer. The reducer is providing a state that has a count variable, and we are feeding it to a count property in the component. Excellent. So we want to go the other way around, right? If I click on these two buttons, I want to notify the reducer that something happened. So let's do that. Let's have notice that we already plugged in the event handlers that presumably are going to be injected, right? We're going to be provided as argument, right, in here. But right now they're not mapped to anything, right? They're not dispatching anything, right? So we need these event handlers to be mapped to some dispatcher. Okay. So let's do that. Let's create here a mapper that maps dispatcher to property mapper. So this takes in as argument the dispatch function that we're going to use to generate a JSON object that maps to each one of those two properties. There's two properties, the increment property and the decrement property, right? And we are mapping to those properties. What are we mapping? To dispatch functions. So let's do an increment here. Right? It's going to be an anonymous function that's going to call dispatch, and it's going to send something like type increment, right? And it's going to have then a decrement. So the decrement here, I'm going to pass in decrement. Everybody good? Okay. And we're going to take that dispatch mapper, and we're going to pass it into the connect, just like we did earlier with the state. We're going to pass also the dispatch mapper. Okay. All right. So now our two buttons are now notifying the reducer, but the reducer is not doing anything with it. Okay. The reducer is ignoring it right now. So that it doesn't ignore it. Here we're going to receive here the action, right? And based on the action, based on the type of the action, right, based on action type, we are going to take a couple of different results. We're going to say that if it's increment, then we're going to return count, and the count should be whatever the state.count was, right, plus 1, right, increment. So I'm going to say count is going to be whatever the initial state.count was plus 1, right? Or if the was decrement, I'm going to return count minus state.count. Otherwise, if it's neither one, we're just going to return the current state. We're not going to change the state. All right? Everybody good? Okay. So that if we go here and we click on decrement, notice that indeed it is decrementing the increment, the value of the counter. Okay. So one more thing might be that perhaps we don't want to count by 1, right? Maybe we want to count by maybe as an argument. So perhaps here you could pass as argument in this dispatchers. You can pass here the type is obligatory, right? It has to have a type, right? But anything else that you pass here, anything else that you pass is something that might mean something to you, right? The step, how many? What's the step? I want to decrement by 10, right? So I want to increment by 10, and I want to decrement by 20. Okay. So again, this might mean something to you. And that whatever you pass in as argument there is passed in as part of the action object. Right? So you could say that the count is, is whatever the state that count was, plus the action dot step. Or it might be that if it was a decrement, it's whatever the count was minus whatever the step was. Okay? And again, this step might mean something different to you. Right? It's whatever that argument that you pass in for your particular logic. Right? So decrement, now notice that it increments by 10 and it decrements by 20s. Make sense? Right? So those arguments. So that's what I was mentioning, that these arguments that you're passing here, these might be some the result of some complex computation, right, of what you're passing as an argument here. Yes? You might be pushing something to an array and modifying some piece of data, and then you pass it as an argument. Right? So that's why oftentimes these objects, right, are encapsulated in their functions themselves, right, in a function that calculates what this object might mean, as opposed to being a JSON object right here. Okay, make sense? All right, awesome. All right, so let's clean this up a little bit.